My name's Tim Ubergang and I'm the Curator of Horticulture at the System Garden at the University of Melbourne. We're at Royal Botanic Gardens, Cranbourne. Royal Botanic Gardens, Cranbourne is probably Australia's preeminent authority on Australian plants. And today we're going to speak to John Arnott and learn about conservation and conservation practices within botanic gardens in Australia.
Botanic gardens are places for, they're obviously places for plants, but they're places for plants and people. But they're also about engaging community in the whole agenda around plants and the importance of plants. I think the really great botanic gardens are botanic gardens that are hubs. They're social hubs, they're environmental hubs, they're conservation hubs, they're horticultural hubs. With all these lateral relationships to it's the constituent community around them. The role of botanic gardens in conservation, there's a term called integrated plant conservation, which is using a variety of tools and techniques for plant conservation outcomes. Here at the Cranbourne Gardens, we're actually managing the biodiversity values of a bushland reserve. So there's an ecological management and ecological restoration and managing threatening processes in situ. But we're a little bit different. Most botanic gardens are not sort of linked to patches of conservation reserve or bushland. So the nature of the conservation is more ex situ or off-site. I think unfortunately in many botanic gardens, the really interesting stuff is the stuff that happens out the back. Here at the Cranbourne Gardens, we've got a research garden which is embedded into the Australian garden, and that's our attempt to take that research role, which is often cryptic and in the background, and actually have a bit of a shop front into the role of botanic gardens into research. We're at the Royal Botanic Gardens Cranbourne production nursery, and this is our propagation glasshouse. And the nursery, it's really the engine room of any botanic garden, because it allows the collection curators to be able to source a plant, maybe even go into the wild and collect a plant, bring that propagation material in to the site and propagate, produce, and ultimately, that material gets planted in the garden and gets, there's a label that gets put on it. Royal Botanic Gardens Victoria is heavily involved in a project called Care for the Rare. And Care for the Rare, it's a plant conservation project certainly, but it's also a sector capacity building project. So what we're doing with BGANZ Victoria is looking at establishing conservation collections in a number of regional botanic gardens across the state of Victoria. But for that project to be sort of driven and supported by the Royal Botanic Gardens Victoria. Essentially what we're doing is we're going out to regional botanic gardens, we're working with the gardens curators and gardens managers on an approach to establishing collections of rare and threatened plants that are significant to that particular area. And then the RBGV will actually collect, source and propagate all that material and then distribute that material back out into regional gardens. We've recently come back from far north Queensland from a plant collecting expedition. James Cook University and the Australian Tropical Herbarium are the lead agency for this project, which is also including a number of botanic gardens up and down the eastern seaboard of Australia. So RBG Victoria, Royal Botanic Gardens Sydney, National Botanic Gardens, Cairns Botanic Gardens, Dandenong Ranges Botanic Gardens are all ultimately will be holding collections of plants which are being collected off some of these mountain peaks in far north Queensland. These mountain peaks, there's really high levels of endemism. So there's about 70 plant species that are found nowhere else on planet Earth beyond these half a dozen peaks or sometimes single peaks in far north Queensland. The climate modelling is suggesting that these peaks are going to heat up and the rainfall patterns throughout the year are going to change, so much more variability in rainfall. And the botanists and the scientists in far north Queensland are not really sure what the effect on these plants might be beyond it's a threatening process. So the idea is that we collect all of these 70 threatened species, distribute them across a number of botanic gardens on the eastern seaboard of Australia, It's kind of the backstop to extinction population if indeed through these threatening processes some of these things become in trouble over time. These are legacy projects. You know, botanic gardens are legacy projects, and we know that some of the tree material that we're planting in the ground now will be mature trees in 50 years' time or 100 years' time. And there's a lovely example in the Australian garden, a Eucalyptus vitrix, which is one of the coolabars. White-trunked, gnarly, beautiful eucalyptus coolabars. Now, it's surviving in this climate, but it's proving to be pretty slow. But in 50 years' time, we'll have something like an Albert Namangira moment, because we'll have this beautiful white gnarly tree sitting in a red landscape. Plant your garden. You know, we know that by planting a tree in the garden, that you can actually make a really positive contribution to mitigating, you know, the urban heat island. You know, plant a tree and you'll cool down your garden. Plant a tree with your neighbour and you'll cool down your street. And you can take that and plant a tree across your suburb and you could potentially cool the suburb. So there's an absolute correlation between vegetation in urban landscapes and urban cooling. We can plant trees, and we can plant a lot of trees, locally, regionally and nationally.
Everything, I guess, you know, we need plants for everything to live really, so without plants we wouldn't be here.
Education, conservation ideals and public enjoyment.
It gives them an opportunity to get back to nature. A lot of the time, you know, everyone's a bit disconnected with that these days, so it's nice to have something that's so close to the community to enjoy.
I can have people come in and understand the importance of preserving our nature.
Bringing all walks of life to the garden to connect with plants.
It makes people aware of the types of plants that they can grow in their own garden that are native.
Knowledge and inspiration and understanding and joy.